Give your bedroom to Madison or get out forever!
Fine. But when you discover who truly owns this house, don't ask me to save you.
Give your bedroom to Madison, or get out of this house forever. My stepmother shouted those words across the dinner table while my father stared at his plate. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply packed one suitcase and walked out, because they had no idea the room they were stealing was the one thing keeping their entire life from falling apart. Hello, my name is Claire Bennett. I was 28 years old when my family decided I was no longer welcome in the house where I had grown up. At least, that was what they believed. To understand what happened next, you need to know something about that house. It was not just a building to me. My mother, Evelyn, had designed it before I was born. She was an architect who loved wide windows, old oak floors, and hidden storage spaces. She used to say a home should keep your memories safe, even when the people inside it failed to do the same. My bedroom was on the second floor, overlooking a maple tree my mother planted the year I was born. She painted the walls pale blue herself. After she died from cancer when I was 16, that room became the only place where I could still feel her presence. My father, Richard, remarried 3 years later. His new wife, Vanessa, arrived with expensive perfume, a polished smile, and a daughter named Madison, who was 2 years younger than me. At first, Vanessa acted kind. She told me she never wanted to replace my mother. Then, little by little, she began replacing everything my mother had touched. The family photographs disappeared from the hallway. My mother's dishes went into boxes. Her reading chair was donated without anyone asking me. Whenever I protested, Vanessa gave me the same calm answer. Claire, we cannot live in the past forever. The strange thing was that I did not actually live there full-time anymore. I had an apartment 20 minutes away and worked as a financial compliance analyst. But after my father suffered a mild stroke, I began staying at the house 3 or 4 nights each week. I cooked his meals, organized his medicine, drove him to appointments, and quietly paid several bills when his construction business started struggling. Vanessa told everyone she was his devoted caregiver. In reality, she spent most afternoons shopping or meeting friends at the country club. Madison had moved to Los Angeles to chase an acting career, though most of her time seemed to be spent posting photographs beside rented cars. Then one Thursday evening, Madison returned home without warning. She entered the house carrying 6 designer suitcases and wearing sunglasses even though it was raining. Vanessa embraced her as if she had returned from war. My father smiled weakly from his chair. Madison announced that Los Angeles had become toxic, and she needed a place to recover. I later learned that her landlord had evicted her for 6 months of unpaid rent, but no one mentioned that at dinner. Vanessa spent the meal discussing Madison's need for peace, privacy, and natural light. I knew exactly where the conversation was going before she said my name. Claire, she began. Your room has the best view and the largest closet. I put down my fork. The guest room is empty. The guest room faces the road, Madison said. I can't create content with traffic noise. You can use my room while I'm at my apartment, I offered. But my personal things stay there. And I'll need it on the nights I care for Dad. Vanessa's smile disappeared. That is not good enough. She slammed both hands onto the table so hard that the glasses shook. Madison is moving home permanently. You will give her that bedroom, completely, or you can get out forever. I turned toward my father. Dad. He would not look at me. He moved a piece of potato around his plate and whispered, maybe it would be easier if you just let her have it. Those words hurt more than Vanessa's shouting. I had spent 2 years arranging his life around doctor visits, medications, and unpaid invoices. I had protected him from knowing how close his company was to collapse. Yet when I needed him to say one sentence in my defense, he chose silence. Madison leaned back with a satisfied smile. I could have argued. I could have reminded them who paid the property taxes that year. I could have shown them the notices hidden in my briefcase. But something in my father's lowered eyes told me the decision had been made long before dinner, so I nodded. All right, I said. I'll leave tonight. Vanessa blinked. She had prepared herself for a fight, not an agreement. And your room? She asked. Madison can have whatever is left in it. I went upstairs and locked the door behind me. For several minutes, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to breathe through the pain. Then I remembered something my mother had taught me. Never make an important decision while someone else is enjoying your panic. I pulled one suitcase from the closet. I packed clothes, my laptop, medication, and the small wooden box containing my mother's jewelry. Then I removed a framed sketch of the house from the wall. Behind it was a narrow steel door. My mother had built a hidden document compartment into the wall. I discovered it as a child, but she made me promise never to tell anyone. Inside were the original property records, her will, several letters, and a sealed envelope marked with my name. I had opened that envelope after her death. The letter explained that my mother had placed her ownership of the house into the Evelyn Bennett Family Trust. My father had the right to live there for the rest of his life, but only if he followed 3 conditions. He had to maintain the property, keep the taxes current, and never force me to leave while I was providing care for him. If he violated those terms, his right to control the property could be terminated by the trustee. The trustee was my mother's older brother, Uncle James, a retired probate attorney. Vanessa had always assumed the house belonged entirely to my father. Apparently, my father had allowed her to believe it. I photographed every document and placed the originals in my suitcase. Before leaving, I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic payments I had been making for the utilities, property taxes, and my father's business insurance. I did not take anything that belonged to him. I simply stopped protecting people who had ordered me out of their lives. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, Madison was already measuring the living room for a new vanity. Vanessa stood by the door with her arms folded. "Leave your key," she said. I placed it on the table. My father finally looked at me. For 1 second, I thought he might stop me. Instead, he said, "We'll talk when everyone has calmed down." "No," I answered quietly. "We'll talk when everyone is ready to tell the truth." Then I walked outside. It was raining harder by then, but I felt strangely calm. Vanessa believed she had won. Madison believed she had inherited a beautiful room. My father believed I would return in 2 days and quietly fix everything, as I always had. None of them understood that I had just stopped holding up the ceiling. The first phone call came the next morning. My father's office manager, Denise, told me the business insurance payment had failed. She sounded frightened. One of his construction sites could not legally operate without coverage. "You usually handle this," she said. "I used to," I replied. "Please call Richard." An hour later, my father called 6 times. I did not answer. He left a message saying there had been a misunderstanding and I was behaving irresponsibly. That word almost made me laugh. I had spent years being responsible for problems I had not created. By Monday, the electricity company sent a late payment notice. On Tuesday, the county mailed a property tax warning. On Wednesday, Vanessa called me from a number I did not recognize. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I moved out, exactly as you ordered. Your father's business could be shut down. Then you should help him. Family does not abandon family over a bedroom." I let the silence sit between us. "You told me to get out forever," I said. "I believed you." She hung up. Uncle James met me at a quiet restaurant near his office. He read the trust documents carefully, though he already knew every line. When I told him what happened, his expression hardened. "Your mother added that protection because she worried Richard could be pressured after she was gone," he said. "Did Dad know about the condition?" He signed an acknowledgement in front of 2 witnesses. The betrayal shifted inside me. My father had not simply been weak at dinner. He knew Vanessa's order could cost him control of the house, and he still allowed it. James explained that we needed evidence before the trust could act. A single angry statement might be dismissed as a family argument. We had to show that they had genuinely removed me and intended to deny my access. Fortunately, Vanessa and Madison were eager to provide proof. Madison posted a video online titled, "Taking Back My Dream Room." In it, she showed my furniture piled in the hallway and laughed about finally removing the family ghost. Vanessa appeared in the background saying, "Claire doesn't live here anymore, and she never will again." I saved the video. 2 days later, a neighbor sent me photographs of a locksmith changing the front and back locks. I saved those too. Then Denise called with something more serious. While reviewing my father's company accounts, she had discovered payments to a consulting firm called Vantage Lifestyle Group. The company had received nearly $180,000 over 18 months, despite performing no visible work. The owner of Vantage Lifestyle Group was Madison. My father's construction company was not failing because of bad luck. Money was being drained from it. I spent the entire night reviewing statements I still had legal access to as the company's former compliance officer. The pattern was clear. Vanessa had convinced my father to classify Madison's rent, car payments, travel, and credit card bills as marketing expenses. Several invoices appeared to have been aided after the payments were made. That was not just selfish. It could be fraud. The next morning, I confronted my father at a coffee shop. He looked 10 years older than he had the week before. "You investigated me," he asked after I placed the documents on the table. "I reviewed records I was hired to monitor. Did you approve these payments?" He rubbed his forehead. "Vanessa said Madison would promote the company online. Her account has never mentioned the company." I was trying to keep the peace. There it was again. The excuse he used whenever his silence hurt someone else. I asked why he had not defended me at dinner. He stared through the window. Vanessa threatened to leave if Madison didn't get the room. So you sacrificed me because you knew I was less likely to leave. His eyes filled with shame, but he did not deny it. Then, he said something that changed everything. Vanessa told me the house would come hers if something happened to me. She said you had already received your mother's share. I slowly opened my bag and showed him a copy of the trust. As he read, the color left his face. This cannot be right. You signed it. He studied the signature page and closed his eyes. He remembered signing documents after my mother died, but he claimed grief had made everything unclear. I wanted to feel sorry for him. Part of me did. But grief could explain forgetting a paragraph. It could not explain years of letting Vanessa erase my mother, use the company, and push me out. Come home, he whispered. What can fix this? Do you want me home because I'm your daughter, or because you're losing the house? He did not answer quickly enough. I stood up and left. Uncle James sent a formal notice 3 days later. It informed my father that he had violated the occupancy agreement, and that a hearing would be held to determine whether his control of the property should end. Vanessa responded by hiring an aggressive lawyer named Paul Mercer. She claimed to have abandoned my father during a medical crisis and was using an old document to steal his home. Then she made her biggest mistake. She invited several relatives to the house for what she called a family intervention. Her plan was to shame me into withdrawing the trust complaint. She sent me a message saying that if I had any love for my father, I would attend. I agreed, but I did not go alone. Uncle James came with me, along with Denise, and an independent forensic accountant named Laura Kim. Vanessa expected one guilty daughter. Instead, she opened the door to 4 people carrying organized files. The living room barely looked familiar. My mother's artwork was gone. Madison had turned my bedroom into a studio with bright lights and pink furniture. Several relatives sat in a nervous semicircle, while Paul Mercer stood near the fireplace. Vanessa began with tears. She described herself as a devoted wife trapped between 2 ungrateful daughters. She said I had always resented Madison. She accused me of using my education and money to frighten my sick father. When she finished, Uncle James placed the trust agreement on the coffee table. He calmly explained that the house had never belonged to Vanessa and would never pass to her through my father. My mother's trust owned it. My father's right to live there depended on specific conditions, which he had broken when he allowed me to be permanently expelled and the locks to be changed. Vanessa's tears stopped immediately. That document is ancient. She snapped. Richard can transfer the house to me whenever he wants. No, James said. He cannot. Madison crossed her arms. Then Claire can just forgive the violation. I looked at her. Why would I do that? Because we're family. Was I family when my belongings were thrown into the hallway? No one answered. Then Laura opened the company records. She explained that Vantage Lifestyle Group had received nearly $200,000, including newer payments we had not initially found. Several invoices listed services on dates when Madison was traveling overseas. One invoice carried my electronic approval signature. I had never approved it. Someone had copied my credentials after I left. Paul Mercer immediately stopped smiling. He asked Vanessa and Madison to speak with him privately. Madison refused. She shouted that the money was a gift and her mother had said everything was legal. Vanessa turned on her daughter with a look so cold that the entire room fell silent. You were supposed to keep quiet, she hissed. That sentence told us more than any invoice could. My father sat in his chair with both hands trembling. For the first time, he seemed to understand that keeping the peace had not protected his family. It had given the most demanding person complete control. He looked at Vanessa and asked, "Did you forge Claire's approval?" Vanessa insisted she had done what was necessary to save the business. Laura corrected her. The money had not saved the company. It had nearly destroyed it. Then my father did what he should have done years earlier. He stood up. His voice shook, but it was clear. Vanessa, you and Madison need to leave. Vanessa laughed in disbelief. You cannot throw me out of my own home. James answered for him. It was never your home to own. As she turned toward me. You planned this. You wanted revenge. I thought about that word. Revenge would have been taking pleasure in her fear. Revenge would have been humiliating Madison online or letting my father's business collapse. That was not what I wanted. I wanted the truth to stop being punished while lies were rewarded. No, I said. You ordered me to leave. I simply stopped saving you from the consequences. The weeks that followed were painful and messy. Vanessa moved into a hotel, then filed for divorce. Madison deleted her videos and claimed online that she had been the victim of a family conspiracy. The company's lawyer reported the forged approvals and false invoices. Because my father cooperated fully, returned the remaining funds, and accepted responsibility for his negligence, The company avoided criminal charges against him. Madison entered a restitution agreement after investigators became involved. Vanessa faced a separate civil case for fraud and misuse of company funds. My father lost control of the house under the trust, but Uncle James did not force him into the street. The property was transferred into my name, and I offered my father a written lease for the downstairs guest suite. It gave him privacy and security, but no power to transfer, mortgage, or promise the property to anyone else. Some relatives said I was too strict. Others said I was too generous. I stopped letting people, who had never carried the burden, tell me how heavy it should feel. My father began therapy. He sold the construction company to his employees and used the proceeds to repay its debts. For the first time in years, he learned to organize his own medicine and pay his own bills. Our relationship did not heal in one dramatic moment. Real healing rarely does. At first, we spoke only about practical things. Then one evening, he knocked on my bedroom door. I had restored the pale blue walls and returned my mother's sketch to its place. He held a cardboard box filled with photographs Vanessa had hidden in the attic. "I found these," he said. Inside were pictures of my mother laughing in the garden, holding blueprints in the kitchen, and standing beneath the young maple tree, with one hand on her pregnant stomach. My father sat beside me on the floor. "I failed you," he said. "I kept telling myself silence was kindness. It wasn't, it was cowardice, and you paid for it. I had imagined hearing an apology like that for years. When it finally came, it did not erase the pain. But it made room for something new. I can forgive you," I told him, "but I cannot go back to being the person who fixes everything so no one has to change." He nodded. "I know." 6 months later, we planted a second maple tree beside the first one. The older tree represented the life my mother had given me. The new one represented the life I had finally chosen for myself. I also turned the guest room facing the road into a small office for a nonprofit that helps caregivers understand property rights, financial abuse, and family trusts. Denise joined me part-time. We helped people who had spent years protecting everyone except themselves. As for my old bedroom, I kept it. Not because it was the largest room or had the best view, but because it reminded me of the night I learned an important truth. Sometimes people mistake your patience for weakness, because they never see the strength it takes to keep choosing peace. And when you finally walk away, they think they have won, until they discover that your quiet love was the only thing holding their world together. Vanessa told me to get out forever. Instead, I walked out for 1 week, returned with the truth, and made sure no one could ever erase me from my own home again. And that was the night they thought they had taken my room. But all they really did was give me back my life.